In the small town of Meadow Ridge, high school football wasn't just a game, it was life. Every Friday night, the entire town would gather at the local stadium, filling the bleachers with families, friends, and fans. The air buzzed with excitement as people cheered for their beloved Meadow Ridge Mustangs. At the heart of it all was the team's star quarterback, known to everyone simply as the Cannon. He had earned that nickname because of his powerful arm, capable of throwing a football farther than anyone else in the league. But beyond his talent on the field, he carried himself with swagger, flashing a cocky grin that made him both admired and envied by nearly everyone. Jake, or the Cannon, ruled the school. His golden hair and confident stride turned heads wherever he went. Students whispered about him in the hallways, girls swooned over him, and even teachers gave him a bit more slack than they did other students. On the field, he was unstoppable, leading his team to victory after victory, earning trophies, headlines, and endless praise. To the people of Meadow Ridge, Jake wasn't just a player. He was a hero. And yet, despite all the glory, there was something missing: a spark of challenge, someone who didn't fall for his charm or bow down to his fame. Little did Jake know, that person was about to walk into his world. Enter Clara, the new girl at Meadow Ridge High. She arrived halfway through the school year, transferring from her family's cattle ranch 30 miles outside of town. Life on. The farm had shaped her in ways no classroom ever could. Her hands were calloused from years of working with tools and ropes, her skin tanned from long days under the sun, and her wardrobe consisted mostly of practical clothes like overalls and sturdy boots. Clara wasn't used to big crowds or fancy events. In fact, she preferred the quiet rhythm of farm life, the sound of cows mooing in the distance, the smell of fresh hay, and the satisfaction of a hard day's work. When Clara stepped foot into Meadow Ridge High for the first time, she stuck out like a sore thumb. The polished sneakers, designer backpacks, and perfectly styled hair of her classmates were a stark contrast to her simple, no-frills appearance. Whispers followed her everywhere she went. Some kids laughed behind her back, calling her farm girl and making jokes about tractors and dirt. Others stared openly, curious about this outsider who seemed so different from everyone else. Clara heard it all but never let it show. She walked through the halls with her head held high, refusing to let their words get to her. After all, she hadn't come here for popularity or approval. She'd come because her parents thought it was time for her to experience something new. At first, Jake barely noticed Clara. Between practices, games, and maintaining his status as the king of the school, he didn't have much time for anything revolve around football. But one evening, while heading to the gym to lift weights after practice, he stumbled upon something unexpected. Through the glass windows of the workout room, he saw Clara flipping an enormous tractor tire across the floor. Each time she pushed it over, sweat dripped from her brow, but her expression remained focused and determined. Jake stopped in his tracks, watching in awe. He'd never seen anyone move with such strength and precision before, not even some of the strongest guys on his own team. Curiosity got the better of him, and Jake decided to introduce himself. "Hey," he said, stepping into the room. Clara glanced up briefly, then went back to her workout without saying a word. Undeterred, Jake tried again. "I'm Jake. You must be the new girl everyone's talking about." This time, Clara paused, wiping her hands on her jeans before looking him directly in the eye. "Clara," she replied simply, her tone neither friendly nor hostile. Jake wasn't used to being met with indifference. Most people tripped over themselves trying to impress him or win his favor, but Clara wasn't like most people. There was something about her confidence, her refusal to play along with the usual games, that intrigued him. Over the next few days, he found himself thinking about her more often than he cared to admit. Who was this girl who flipped tractor tires like they were nothing? And why did she seem completely unfazed by his presence? It wasn't long before fate brought them together again. During a pep rally, Coach Miller announced a new initiative aimed at fostering leadership among the senior class. As part of the program, each student-athlete was assigned to mentor a newcomer to the school. When Jake received his assignment, he was surprised and maybe a little excited to see Clara's name on the list. It felt like an opportunity, though he wasn't quite sure what kind yet. Determined to make a good impression, Jake approached Clara after school one afternoon. "So, I guess we're partners now," he said with a grin. Clara raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "If you say so," she replied, shrugging. Jake suggested they meet up for extra conditioning drills. After practice, hoping to bond over their shared interest in fitness. To his relief, Clara agreed, but only if he was willing to try some of her workouts too. What started as a casual offer quickly turned into a test of endurance, pushing both of them further than they'd ever imagined as the weeks went by. Jake began to realize that Clara wasn't just strong physically, she was mentally tough as, well, she didn't care about fitting in or seeking validation from others. Instead, she stayed true to herself, no matter what anyone thought. And though Jake still couldn't quite figure her out, one thing was certain: Clara Hayes, the girl everyone called Farm Girl, was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Jake's first attempt at mentoring Clara didn't go quite as smoothly as he'd hoped. He showed up at the gym after practice, ready to impress her with his usual routine of bench presses and squats, but Clara had other plans. Instead of letting him take the lead, she handed him a pair of gloves and pointed to a massive tractor tire lying in the corner. "If you want to train with me, you're doing this," she said, matter-of-faculty. Jake hesitated for a moment, eyeing the tire like it was some kind of alien creature. It was easily twice his height and looked like it weighed more than anything he'd ever lifted before. Still, he wasn't about to back down, not in front of Clara. With a cocky smirk, he grabbed the edge of the tire and tried to flip it over. The second his muscles engaged, he realized just how heavy it really was. His face turned red, veins popping out on his neck as he strained with all his might. But no matter how hard he pushed, the tire barely budged. Clara watched silently, arms crossed, until Jake finally gave up, panting and frustrated. "You're using the wrong technique," she said, stepping forward. Without waiting for a response, she positioned herself in front of the tire, braced her legs, and drove her body into it with perfect form. The massive rubber beast flipped over effortlessly, landing with a thud that echoed through the room. Jake stared at her, equal parts impressed and embarrassed. "That's how you do it," Clara said, turning to look at him. Her tone wasn't mocking. It was straightforward, almost helpful. But Jake couldn't help feeling a pang of irritation. No one had ever made him feel so inadequate. Determined not to let her win, he stepped up again and tried once more, mimicking her movements this time. This attempt was better, though still far from graceful. By the end of their session, Jake managed to flip the tire 3 times, each effort leaving him drenched in sweat and gasping for air. But Clara wasn't done yet. After the tires came rope climbs, sprints across uneven terrain, and even carrying sandbags up and down stairs. Each exercise pushed Jake to his limits in ways he'd never experienced before. For someone used to being the strongest guy in the room, it was humbling and infuriating. Yet, there was something oddly satisfying about the challenge. Every time he thought he couldn't go on, Clara would give him a nod of encouragement or a quick tip to adjust his form. And somehow, that small gesture kept him going as the days turned into weeks. Their sessions became a strange sort of routine. Jake started spending less time showing off his skills and more time focusing on improving them. Clara, for her part, seemed to soften slightly around him. She wasn't exactly warm or chatty, but she wasn't as guarded either. Occasionally, she'd crack a dry joke or offer a rare smile when Jake finally nailed a particularly tough move. Those moments were fleeting, but they stuck with him, making him wonder what else lay beneath her tough exterior. Their partnership wasn't without its challenges, though. Word spread quickly around school about Jake hanging out with Clara, and not everyone was thrilled about it. Some of Jake's teammates teased him mercilessly, calling him farm boy and accusing him of slumming it with the new girl. Others whispered behind Clara's back, saying she was only using Jake to boost her social status. Neither of them paid much attention to the gossip, at least not at first. The tension reached a boiling point during lunch one day. Jake sat with his usual group of friends, laughing and joking as always. But when Tyler, his best friend and wide receiver, brought up Clara, things took a turn. "Seriously, man, why are you wasting your time with her?" Tyler asked, shaking his head. "She doesn't belong here. She's just some farm girl trying to ride your coattails." Jake felt a surge of anger rise in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You don't know her," he shot back, his voice low but firm. "She's helping me get stronger. Stronger than any of you guys could imagine." Tyler scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Stronger? For what? So you can carry bales of hay? Come on, Jake. You're throwing away your reputation for nothing." The comment stung, but Jake refused to let it show. He stood up abruptly, grabbing his tray. "Maybe I don't care about my reputation as much as you think," he muttered before walking away. As he left the cafeteria, he caught sight of Clara sitting alone at a table near the window, munching on an apple while reading a book. For a split second, their eyes met, and Jake felt a flicker of guilt. Was he really willing to risk everything, his friendships, his standing on the team, for someone he barely knew? That night, as Jake lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he replayed the day's events in his mind. Tyler's words echoed in his ears. Asterisk. You're throwing away your reputation for nothing. But deep down, Jake knew that wasn't true. Clara wasn't nothing. She was smart, strong, and unapologetically herself, qualities he admired more than he cared to admit. And while he couldn't explain it, he felt like spending time with her was teaching him things he'd never learned. On the football field, the next morning, Jake decided to visit Clara's ranch. He'd been curious about her life outside of school, and now seemed like as good a time as any to see it for himself. When he pulled up to the property in his truck, he was struck by how vast and peaceful it was. Rolling fields stretched out, as far as the eye could see, dotted with cows grazing lazily under the early morning sun. Clara was already outside, feeding chickens and tossing buckets of grain into troughs. When she spotted Jake, she raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing here?" she asked, clearly surprised. "I wanted to see where you come from," Jake replied, climbing out of his truck. "Thought maybe I could lend a hand." Clara studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just don't complain if you get dirty." For the rest of the afternoon, Jake worked alongside Clara, learning the ins and outs of ranch life. He helped stack hay bales, mend fences, and even milked a cow, which proved to be hilariously awkward. Despite the physical labor, he found himself enjoying the simplicity of it all. There was something therapeutic about working with his hands, knowing that every task contributed to something tangible and real. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake and Clara sat together on the porch, sipping lemonade. For the first time, Jake saw a softer side of Clara. She talked about her dreams of studying veterinary science, her love for animals, and the poetry she wrote in her spare time. It was clear that there was so much more to her than anyone at school realized, including Jake. By the time he drove home that evening, Jake knew one thing for certain. Clara wasn't just flipping tires or teaching him new workouts. She was flipping his perspective on life, one lesson at a time. As Jake continued to spend more time with Clara, their bond deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. What started as a reluctant partnership quickly turned into something far more meaningful. Jake found himself looking forward to their workouts and ranch visits, not just for the physical challenge, but because he genuinely enjoyed her company. Clara, on the other hand, began opening up more, sharing bits and pieces of her life that she rarely revealed to anyone else. It wasn't always easy. Both were fiercely independent, and letting someone in was unfamiliar territory. But slowly, trust began to grow between them. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day of chores, Jake decided to ask a question that had been nagging at him for weeks. "Why'd you really transfer here?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. The sun was setting behind the distant hills, casting a golden glow over the fields. Clara paused, her gaze fixed on the horizon. For a moment, Jake thought she might ignore the question altogether. Then, softly, she began to speak. "It wasn't my idea," she admitted, twirling a strand of hay between her fingers. "My parents sold off part of our land last year. We lost too many cattle during the drought, and things got tight. They thought moving closer to town would be good for me to get some real-world experience, I guess." She let out a small laugh, though it lacked humor. "I didn't want to leave the farm. That place, it's home." Jake listened intently, his usual bravado replaced by quiet empathy. He couldn't imagine being forced to leave everything familiar behind, especially for somewhere as judgmental and superficial as Meadow Ridge High. "Doesn't seem like you're having much fun here," he said finally. Clara shrugged. "It is what it is. People can think whatever they want about me. I don't care. But sometimes—" Her voice trailed off and she hesitated before continuing. "Sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I try, I'll never fit in. Like I'm stuck between two worlds." Jake nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Though their lives were worlds apart, he'd felt that same sense of isolation before, just in a different way. Being the star quarterback came with its own pressures. Everyone expected him to be perfect, to win every game, to live up to the larger-than-life image they'd created for him. And while he thrived on the attention most of the time, there were moments when it felt suffocating. He wondered if Clara saw through all of that, the confident grin, the swagger, and recognized the uncertainty underneath. Their conversation shifted gears when Jake brought up football. "You ever play any sports back home?" he asked casually. Clara snorted. "Not unless you count chasing cows around a sport." Jake chuckled but pressed further. "Come on, seriously. You've got crazy strength and endurance. You could probably crush half the guys on my team." "I don't need trophies or cheers from strangers," Clara replied bluntly. "That stuff doesn't mean anything to me." Her words hit Jake harder than he expected. Trophies and cheers were practically his entire world. Yet sitting there with Clara, surrounded by the simplicity of the ranch, those things suddenly seemed hollow. He realized then that Clara's perspective wasn't just refreshing, it was grounding. She reminded him of why he loved football in the first place: the thrill of pushing yourself, the camaraderie of working toward a common goal, the satisfaction of knowing you gave your all. Somewhere along the line, he'd lost sight of that amidst the pressure to perform and please everyone else. Despite their growing connection, rumors about Jake and Clara continued to swirl around school. Some students whispered that Jake was only hanging out with her to look good or boost his image. Others accused Clara of using him to climb the social ladder. Neither of them paid much attention to the gossip, at least not openly. But even the strongest people have breaking points, and for Jake, that point came during a pep rally. The gymnasium buzzed with energy as the cheerleaders led chants and the band played fight songs. Jake stood near the front of the crowd, flanked by his teammates. When the announcer called him up to say a few words about the upcoming game, he grabbed the mic confidently, ready to pump up the audience. But as he scanned the bleachers, he noticed Clara sitting quietly near the back, her arms crossed and expression unreadable. A group of kids nearby leaned close, laughing and pointing at her. One of them shouted loud enough for Jake to hear. "What's Farm Girl doing here? Did she bring her tractor?" Something snapped inside Jake. Without thinking, he lowered the microphone and stepped toward the hecklers. "Knock it off," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the noise. Like a knife. The laughter died instantly, replaced by stunned silence. "Clara doesn't deserve crap like that," Jake continued, his tone firm but controlled. "She works harder than anyone I know, and she doesn't give a damn about trying to impress you. So maybe instead of wasting your breath tearing her down, you should focus on supporting the team." Got it? No one dared argue. As Jake returned to his spot, the crowd erupted into hesitant applause. Clara watched from her seat, her face unreadable. Later, when Jake approached her after the rally, she simply nodded and said, "Thanks." Just one word, but it carried more weight than any speech or gesture ever could. While Jake earned Clara's respect that day, his actions didn't sit well with everyone. Tyler, his best friend and wide receiver, pulled him aside after practice. Later that week, "What the hell was that?" Tyler demanded, his voice low but angry. "You're supposed to be leading this team, not sticking up for outsiders." "She's not an outsider," Jake shot back, his patience wearing thin. "She's part of this school, same as us. And if you've got a problem with her, you've got a problem with me." Tyler shook his head, frustration written all over his face. "You're throwing away years of trust for what? Some girl who doesn't even care about football?" Jake clenched his fists, struggling to keep his temper in check. "It's not about football," he said through gritted teeth. "It's about doing what's right. If you can't see that, then maybe we're not as close as I thought." With that, Jake walked away, leaving Tyler standing alone on the field. The rift between them was undeniable, but Jake refused to apologize. Standing up for Clara wasn't just about defending her, it was about staying true to himself. And for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he was making decisions based on what mattered, not what others expected of him. Over the next few days, tension simmered within the team. Some players rallied behind Jake, respecting his leadership and integrity. Others sided with Tyler, resenting what they saw as favoritism toward Clara. Practices became tense, conversations awkward, and the once unified Mustangs started to fracture. Coach Miller noticed the shift immediately and called a team meeting to address it. "This isn't about personalities or drama," the coach said sternly, pacing in front of the group. "We're a team. That means we support each other no matter what. If anyone has a problem with that, you can take it up with me, but don't bring it onto the field." His words helped ease the tension slightly, but the underlying issues remained. Jake knew it wouldn't be easy to repair the damage, but he also knew it was worth fighting for. After all, Clara had taught him that real strength came from standing by your principles. Even when it was hard dot and as the season's biggest game loomed ahead, Jake realized something else. Clara hadn't just changed his perspective on life, she was helping him become a better leader, teammate, and person. Whatever happened next, he was ready to face it head-on with Clara by his side. The biggest game of the season had finally arrived. Meadow Ridge High was set to face their fiercest rivals, Oak Ridge High, in a match that would decide who advanced to the state championship. The entire town buzzed with anticipation, and the stadium was packed long before kickoff. Fans filled the bleachers, waving banners and chanting fight songs, while vendors worked overtime selling hot dogs and popcorn. For the Mustangs, this wasn't just another game, it was everything. And for Jake, It was personal. In the locker room, the air was thick with nerves and adrenaline. Players stretched, taped up their ankles, and went over plays one last time. Coach Miller paced back and forth, barking instructions and reminders. "This is it, boys," he said, his voice booming. "Leave it all out there on the field tonight. Play smart, play hard, and trust each other." Jake nodded along, but his mind kept drifting back to Clara. Over the past few weeks, she'd become more than just a mentor or friend. She was his secret weapon. Her unconventional training methods had pushed him harder than he ever thought possible, teaching him to rely on agility and quick thinking rather than brute force. He knew exactly how he wanted to use those lessons tonight. As the team lined up to take the field, Jake spotted Clara standing near the sidelines, wearing her usual practical jeans and flannel shirt. She didn't blend in with the crowd of cheerleaders or flashy fans, but she didn't need to. Just seeing her there gave Jake a surge of confidence. When their eyes met, she gave him a small nod, a silent gesture of support that meant more to him than any pep talk or cheer. The game started off intense, with both teams trading blows like heavyweight boxers. Oak Ridge came out strong, scoring 2 quick touchdowns and leaving Meadow Ridge scrambling to catch up. By halftime, the scoreboard showed a grim reality. Oak Ridge led 21-7. As the players trudged back to the locker room, heads hung low, frustration simmered beneath the surface. Some muttered under their breath, blaming missed tackles or bad calls. Others sat silently, staring at the floor. Coach Miller wasted no time laying into them. "What's wrong with you guys?" he shouted, slamming his clipboard against the wall. "You're playing scared. Stop second-guessing yourselves and start trusting your instincts." Jake listened carefully, letting the coach's words sink in. Then, as the team gathered around to discuss adjustments for the second half, he spoke up. "Let's run Clara's drill," he suggested, looking at the coach. Everyone turned to stare at him, confusion written across their faces. "What are you talking about?" Tyler snapped, clearly annoyed. "We don't have time for gimmicks." "It's not a gimmick," Jake shot back, his tone firm. Turning to the coach, he explained, "Remember that agility drill Clara showed me? It's all about speed and precision, not power. If we mix it into our passing plays, we can throw Oak Ridge off balance." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Coach Miller nodded slowly. "All right, let's give it a shot," he said. "But if it doesn't work, we're sticking to the basics." When the third quarter began, Jake called an audible at the line of scrimmage, signaling for the new play. His teammates exchanged nervous glances but followed his lead. The strategy was simple yet risky. Instead of relying on traditional routes, the receivers would zigzag unpredictably, creating openings for short, quick passes. Meanwhile, Jake focused on evading defenders using the footwork and reflexes Clara had drilled into him. At first, it seemed like madness. Oak Ridge's defense was relentless, swarming Jake every time he dropped back to pass. But then something clicked. On one play, Jake dodged a blitzing linebacker, spun away from a defensive end, and launched a perfect spiral to a wide-open receiver. Sprinting downfield. Touchdown. The crowd erupted, and the Mustangs bench exploded with cheers. Encouraged by the success, Jake doubled down on the strategy. Play after play, he danced through the chaos, staying calm under pressure and finding gaps where none seemed to exist. With less than 2 minutes left in the game, Meadow Ridge trailed by 4 points, deep in Oak Ridge territory. One final drive stood between them and victory or heartbreak. On fourth down, with seconds ticking away, Jake took the snap and scanned the field. Defenders closed in from every direction, but he stayed patient, waiting for the perfect moment. Suddenly, he spotted his tight end breaking free in the corner of the end zone. Planting his feet, Jake unleashed a laser-like throw, threading the needle between two defenders. The ball landed squarely in the receiver's hands as he crossed the goal line. The stadium exploded. Fans stormed the field, hugging players and cheering wildly. Jake barely noticed the chaos around him. Instead, he ran straight to the sidelines where Clara stood watching quietly. Ignoring protocol and probably drawing some strange looks, he pulled her into a triumphant hug. "We did it," he said, grinning ear to ear. Clara rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her own smile. "Don't get used to thanking me," she teased, though her tone was light. "You're the one who threw the winning pass." After the game, reporters swarmed the locker room, eager to hear the story behind Meadow Ridge's miraculous comeback. Jake handled the interviews with his usual charm, but made sure to credit Clara whenever he could. "None of this happens without her," he told one journalist. "She taught me how to think differently, to adapt when things get tough. Honestly, I owe her more than I can say." By the time the media frenzy died down, Clara had become something of a local celebrity. People who once mocked her now approached her with newfound respect, asking questions about her workouts and congratulating her on the team's win. Even the cheerleaders invited her to join them at a post-game celebration, though she politely declined, citing unfinished chores at the ranch. Still, the change in attitude was undeniable. For the first time since arriving in Meadow Ridge, Clara felt accepted, not because she'd tried to fit in, but because she'd stayed true to herself. And while she didn't seek out the spotlight, she couldn't deny the sense of pride that came with knowing she'd made a difference. As the days passed, life at Meadow Ridge High began to settle back into its usual rhythm. Football practices resumed, classes continued, and the buzz of the big win gradually faded. But the impact of that night lingered for Jake, for Clara, and for everyone else who'd witnessed it. During lunch one day, Jake found himself sitting alone for the first time in weeks. Tyler hadn't spoken to him since their argument before the game, and the rift between them still weighed heavily on Jake's mind. Just as he was about to leave the cafeteria, Tyler approached his table, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Hey," Tyler said awkwardly, shifting from one foot to the other. "Can we talk?" Jake gestured for him to sit, unsure of what to expect. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Tyler sighed and said, "Look, I was wrong about, well, everything. About Clara, about you sticking up for her. You were right. I shouldn't have judged her without getting to know her first." Jake blinked, surprised by the apology. "Thanks," he replied simply. "I appreciate that." Tyler nodded, offering a tentative smile. "And hey, congrats on the win. That last play, pretty impressive." "Thanks," Jake said again, returning the smile. Though things wouldn't go back to the way they were overnight, he knew this was a step in the right direction. That evening, Jake drove out to Clara's ranch, carrying a football tucked under his arm. When she saw him pull up, she raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing here?" she asked, leaning against the porch railing. "I brought you something," Jake said, holding out the ball. Clara took it, turning it over in her hands. Then she noticed the inscription scrawled across the leather in bold letters, asterisk, "To my toughest coach and greatest friend. Thanks for flipping my world." Asterisk. Clara stared at the words for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up at Jake, her lips curving into a rare, genuine smile. "You're such a dork," she said, shaking her head. But there was warmth in her voice, a softness that made Jake grin. "Yeah, well, you're stuck with me now," he joked, leaning against the railing beside her. Together, they watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, the quiet comfort of friendship settling between them like an unspoken promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jake knew one thing for certain: Clara Hayes wasn't just the girl who flipped tractor tires or taught him new drills. She was the person who'd flipped his perspective, his priorities, and ultimately, his life. And for that, he'd always be grateful. As the school year rolled on, Clara's presence at Meadow Ridge High became less of a novelty and more of a fixture. The girl who had once been labeled an outsider was now someone people respected and even admired. She didn't change who she was. If anything, she leaned further into her roots. But this time, instead of being mocked for it, she inspired others to see value in authenticity. Her quiet confidence had a way of rubbing off on those around her, making them question their own assumptions about what truly mattered. One of the biggest changes came when Clara decided to start a sustainable agriculture club at school. At first, the idea seemed laughable to some. How could farming compete with football or cheerleading? But Clara wasn't deterred. She pitched her vision to the principal, explaining how growing fresh produce on campus could teach students responsibility, teamwork, and environmental awareness. To everyone's surprise, the proposal was approved, and soon enough, a patch of unused land behind the gymnasium was transformed into a thriving garden. The project quickly gained traction. Students from all walks of life signed up to help, eager to get their hands dirty and learn something new. Even the football team got involved, with Jake leading the charge. They spent weekends tilling soil, planting seeds, and building raised beds under Clara's guidance. For many of them, it was their first real experience with manual labor outside of sports practice. And while some grumbled about blisters and sore muscles, most found themselves enjoying the process, especially when they saw the fruits and vegetables of their labor sprouting from the ground. But Clara didn't stop there. With support from the school board, she convinced them to fund the construction of a greenhouse where plants could thrive year-round. It wasn't easy. She had to draft proposals, give presentations, and answer endless questions from skeptical adults, but she never gave up. When the greenhouse finally opened its doors, it became a hub of activity. Science classes used it for experiments. Art students sketched the vibrant blooms. And even the culinary club started incorporating homegrown herbs and veggies into their recipes. Through it all, Clara remained humble, deflecting praise whenever it came her way. "It's not about me," she'd say with a shrug. "Anyone can grow food if they put in the effort." Yet despite her modesty, it was clear that she'd sparked something important, a shift in perspective that went beyond just gardening. People began to realize that success wasn't measured by trophies or popularity. It was about finding purpose and making a difference, no matter how small. For Jake, the transformation was equally profound. Winning the big game against Oak Ridge had solidified his status as a local legend. But it wasn't the victory itself that defined him anymore. It was the journey, the lessons he'd learned along the way. Clara had taught him that leadership wasn't about barking orders or hogging the spotlight. It was about lifting others up, even when it meant stepping out of your comfort zone. When scholarship offers started pouring in, Jake faced a tough decision. Several prestigious universities wanted him for their football programs, promising fame, fortune, and a shot at the pros. But one offer stood out, a smaller school known for its strong agricultural science program. At first, Jake dismissed it outright. Why would he trade the glitz and glamour of Division I football for a place where cows outnumbered students? Then, Clara mentioned it casually during one of their conversations. "You should think about it," she said, leaning against the fence at the ranch. "They've got a great vet program, too. Maybe you could combine football with something else you're passionate about." Jake laughed at the idea. "Me? Passionate about farming? Come on." Clara smirked, tossing him a pitchfork. "You might be surprised." That night, Jake lay awake thinking about what she'd said. He pictured himself playing football under Friday night lights. Sure, but also spending weekends learning about sustainable practices, working with animals, and maybe even coaching younger players using the same unconventional methods Clara had taught him. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He accepted the offer, knowing it wasn't the path everyone expected him to take, but it was the right one for him. As graduation approached, emotions ran high. Seniors filled the halls with laughter, tears, and nostalgia, trading yearbooks and snapping photos to capture memories they'd carry forever in their hearts. For Jake and Clara, the milestone felt bittersweet. Their paths were set to diverge, one heading off to college, the other preparing to pursue her dream of studying veterinary science, but neither could deny the impact they'd had on each other. On the last day of school, Jake showed up at Clara's ranch with a box tucked under his arm. Inside was the signed football he'd given her earlier, along with a scrapbook filled with pictures, notes, and mementos from their time together. "Just a little something to remember me by," he said, handing it to her with a sheepish grin. Clara flipped through the pages, her eyes softening as she relived moments she hadn't realized Jake had documented. There were snapshots of them, flipping tractor tires, posing awkwardly in front of the greenhouse, and laughing over failed attempts at milking cows. Each image told a story of growth, not just for Jake and Clara individually, but for their friendship as well. "This is amazing," Clara said finally, closing the book and looking at him. "Thank you." Jake shrugged, trying to play it. "Cool. Figured you might need proof that we actually existed once you leave this place." Clara rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "Don't worry, I won't forget you." "Good," Jake replied, his tone light but sincere. "Because I'm not done being your guinea pig for weird workouts yet." They both laughed, the sound carrying across the fields as the sun dipped below the horizon. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The gossip, the rivalries, the pressure to conform. All that remained was the bond they'd built, forged through sweat, determination, and mutual respect. Months later, as Clara packed up her belongings to leave Meadowridge behind, she paused to glance out the window one last time. The town looked the same as it always had, but she knew better. Things had changed, not just for her, but for everyone who'd crossed her path. Jake's words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, you flipped my world. And in a way, she supposed she had flipped her own too. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Asterisk, first day of practice tomorrow. Let's hope these city slickers are ready for some farm-style training. Asterisk, Clara chuckled, shaking her head. No matter where life took her next, she knew one thing for certain. Jake and the lessons they'd shared would always have a special place in her heart. As the truck rumbled down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust, she smiled to herself, ready to embrace whatever came next, because sometimes the most unexpected partnerships lead to the greatest victories, not just on the field, but in life.